because the way to end all of this is for Joe Biden to pick up the phone, call Benjamin Netanyahu, and say, you're done. You're finished. No more. Not one more dollar flows your direction. We will put the freeze on all military assistance. We will stop supporting you at the United Nations. If you want to be condemned by the world is ready to condemn you. The only thing saving you is our veto. And we're going to step aside and let them unload on you. You ignorant son of a bitch. Stop committing genocide in Gaza right now. Stand down to your army. Bring a ceasefire. Bring the humanitarian. It's over, Bibi. You're done. We could end all of this right now. And we'd actually emerge as the heroes, even though we don't deserve it. We'd be the heroes. But we don't have the courage to do that. Why? Because Israel has bought the United States Congress, the United States presidency, the United States political establishment. They own us. And so they control us. And we are unable to do the one thing that needs to be done.
Let me ask you this, something I noticed. Shortly after the Ukraine conflict, I remember recalling reading, and I'm seeing they're putting satellites in the air. They're putting satellites in the air. They're putting more satellites in the air, right? Every so often, you'll see another satellite goes in the air, right? Iran, about a week and a half ago, put like 3 satellites in the air, right? and I thought to myself, well, that sure as hell ain't Iraq you're looking at, because Iraq wasn't putting satellites in the air. And when you're dealing with somebody who's starting to put satellites, recently, North Korea, the leader met with Putin. Then they take him over to Roscosmos Space Center. He looks around, he goes home, boom, they got satellites in the air, right? I'm not saying that Russia helped them, but who knows? Just who knows? Here's my point. Because you would know this. Iran has to say, right now, we've got the highest chance that we've had in a long time that we'll be attacked by the U.S. And as you say, we got to be locked and loaded. Week and a half ago, they put 3 satellites in the air. What is the purpose? If you think you're going to be attacked, if you think you're on the verge of somebody coming after you, what do you put the satellites in the air? What are their purpose? What's going on there?
Well, also remember, you don't go from A to Z when it comes to satellite technology. Iran has been working on this. The amazing thing for this launch is they put all 3 in at the same time using the same launch vehicle, which is impressive. That shows great launch technology. It shows an ability to take 3 separate devices and put them in separate orbits in the sky. That's technology that translates into, and this is where people need to be worried about re-entry vehicles and the ability to position yourself and stuff like this. But satellites isn't just about launching; it's about collecting, refining, the technology of collection. What works on the ground doesn't necessarily work in space. And so I would imagine that the Iranians have put out at a minimum, some sort of rudimentary imaging satellite. Today, with today's technology, the satellite probably has more than sufficient resolution to be used for very precise targeting and intelligence collection. I would imagine that they would be looking for some sort of radar technology for all weather imaging capability. That's an important part of what goes on today. There's cloud coverage. There's nighttime. So if you have purely, daylight dependent electro optics, you lose a lot of collection. But if you have radar, you can collect 24/7. It's that the resolution isn't as good, but it's sufficient to track movement, to track changes, and things of that nature. And then I would imagine that they'd be looking at signals intelligence. They'd be looking at a way to capture signals of interest. Now, the interesting thing here is that, they aren't going to be totally dependent upon this. The one thing that the Iranians also have going for them is they have very advanced drone capabilities, and they've been using these drones to collect imagery, to collect SIGINT. They have very effective ground-based signals intelligence capabilities. And so what this means is that they can actually become very focused on what they want these satellites to do. These don't have to be the big, American equivalents, KH-11, KH-12 giant school bus sized satellites. These can be smaller, more focused satellites that, fill a gap in the existing click. Because remember, Iran's operating from its home turf. So they have a lot of intelligence collection capability inherent with their human intelligence networks. They're insinuated everywhere in the Middle East. Their embassies and other fronts have the ability to collect signals intelligence, and their drones are collecting imagery as well. So they don't need to have comprehensive coverage like we need, for instance. So they can be much more tailored, much more focused. But I still think that, they may be at, H, but they're not at Z yet. So these satellites up there are more of a technology test bed than the deployment of genuine capacity. That's my assessment. Again, I can't say for certain.
Okay. Okay. Now let me ask you this. There's an article. Let's look at this and get your thoughts on it. It's freaking a lot of people out. U.S. troops told to prepare for war in Gaza. The U.S. Air Force personnel in Iraq have been ordered to remain on standby in case of on-ground U.S. involvement in the Israel-Hamas war. Is that, in your opinion, because I've been seeing people have been sending me that, in your opinion, is that propaganda? Is it fluff? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, we're talking about U.S. Air Force personnel. So it's not like we're deploying ground combat troops. The only exception to that would be if these were, special tactics soldiers, the air commandos that go in and do, combat control and things of that nature. But there's no reason to do that. Israel, you're not going to be operating off of unimproved airfields or remote airfields. If you're going into Israel, Israel has an existing infrastructure. So what I would imagine is that this would be related to a surge in logistics. This is what the U.S. does. We're not going to put a division on the ground, or that's stupid. We don't train with the Israelis like that. We would actually weaken them further by complicating command and control and logistics. Remember, putting troops on the ground is just the beginning, Garland. They eat. You got to get food to them. Either you bring the food in or you contract with an Israeli vendor, and that Israeli vendor may be able to generate that food of sufficient quality and sufficient quantity on time, on target, or else no. Ammunition has to be brought in. Spare parts, maintenance. If you're going to deploy equipment into theater, that means that now we have to build up a depot capability inside Israel with maintenance facilities, etc. So no, I don't think we're sending troops to Israel at all. I think what this could be is that what we're saying is that if Israel does get involved in a shooting war with Hezbollah or an armed conflict with Iran, if this thing expanded that way, that you need to be prepared to execute Operation Order, Alpha Bravo 007. And that means that, on command, the Expeditionary Logistics Sustainability Squadron will deploy to, Tel Aviv and establish a forward presence capable of surging in X, Y, and Z. You need to be able to establish a warehousing of X number of cubic meters that, that order will go out. Now, these orders are issued all the time, especially in times of crisis. So it's possible that when the Pentagon began saying, well, Mr. President, here's your options. Option A, do nothing. Option B, limited strike. Option C, more expanded strike. Option D, blow the hell out of Iran. And people went, let's look at options, B, C, and D. Well, now you're looking at it, and now the Pentagon goes, they're looking at it, and if they execute, if they give an execute order in 3 days, we need to be ready. So hey, let's issue an alert and get a warning order out there. Let's get these units prepared to implement this plan. So now the units that could be involved in surging logistics capacity in, they might send an advanced team in. They have to get everybody ready, get the airplanes identified, make sure that we know where the planes are coming from, where the equipment's coming from, all this kind of stuff. It happens all the time. Warning orders are issued every day. When I was in the Marine Corps, I don't know how many times we got a warning order to be prepared to deploy on 12 hours notice to the Middle East in response to potential threat from X, Y, and Z. And then you know, as an intelligence officer, you get into the command post and you start reading the data, doing the plans, updating the targeting databases, making sure all this stuff. The logisticians are doing the same thing, getting all that, talking to the Air Force when the planes are going to come in, and then they go stand down, and you go, oh, I get to play golf this weekend instead of die. So I think that's what's happening. I think somebody got a hint of a warning order, and it went out there. But again, look, it's U.S. Air Force personnel. It's not like they told the amphibious ready group, warning order to deploy the regimental combat team, into Haifa, or the U.S. Army get ready to deploy, X brigade combat team to Israel. This is the U.S. Air Force. So that's what I think. I wouldn't read too much into that article.
I did want to ask you about the state of affairs with in the Red Sea. I know before we move on to Ukraine, I know that the last I heard, the British said they may be sending an aircraft carrier to the Red Sea. I'm shocked that they have anything that actually runs. I mean, I literally reported on an article, you probably saw it, where a nuclear submarine, the bolts came out of the reactor and they held it together with super glue, right? Literally. But
great advertisement for super glue, though.
yeah, never thought about that. Yeah, but I hear there's another fight in the Red Sea. The Houthis are saying they hit a container ship. They're saying they hit the USS specifically. They hit the USS Gravely. I don't know if that's true, but it sounds to me like, okay, we know that Israel's desperate when it comes to bringing things into their. I tell everybody, my dad was a longshoreman. I know everything comes in by ship. If your ports are shut down, your shelves get empty in a hurry, right? And it seems to me the U.S. is trying to bring U.S. container ships in because nobody else will do it. But apparently there's been some more fights. What is the state of affairs in the Red Sea that you know of?
Well, I first of all, I don't think they hit a U.S. warship. I don't think that's happened yet. I do believe they hit the container ship they're talking about, or they came close enough to it to deter its movement. A week or so ago, the U.S. did a big operation where we lined up 4 or 5 destroyers to create a screen. And the screen was supposed to block all cruise missiles, drones, etc. And then 2 U.S. flagged container ships were going to make a run, through the strait up the Red Sea to Israel. And the Houthi fired all their stuff, and we shot down most. But one missile landed 100 yards off the stern of one of the container ships, and the captain went, "We're done." Flipped around, retreated, and the U.S. had to retreat. We lost that battle. We didn't lose a ship, but we didn't accomplish the mission. But worse, after that happened, the companies that owned those containers said, "Nah, we're done. We're shutting down Red Sea operations straight through the Horn of Africa, and that's the only way we're going." And the insurance companies, just to dot the I and cross the T, said, "Yeah, we're not going to insure any more ships to make that run. It's just a stupid run to make. We're not going to do it as long as the Houthi are trying to sink ships." So they effectively shut down. We lost the battle. We lost not just the tactical aspect, the operational, but the strategic. The strategic impact of that battle is that company said, "We don't trust the U.S. Navy enough to make this run. We're going to divert." So now we have the U.S. again trying to make this run. It's not working. Ships are turning around. The port of Elliott is empty. There's no ships there. The Israeli economy is shut down, as you said. That's how. Do you remember the crisis that we had, the longshore crisis in California, where we had insufficient trucks, or for whatever reason we couldn't get stuff out there, and America was like, "Hey, we're getting hungry. We're shutting down. We need the stuff to move." And it was, it wasn't even a big deal. It was something that could be fixed, and it was fixed. But just imagine if all those container ships just stopped coming into Long Beach, and Long Beach is empty. Seattle is empty. Portland is empty. San Francisco is empty. Nothing's coming in. And all the people that are relying, all that stuff coming in, are going, "Where is it?" And it ain't coming in. If anything, it's coming the long way. And when it arrives, you got to pay more now. And they're like, "Well, that's not what we budgeted." I mean, that's the reality for Israel right now. Their economy is being squeezed. And this is something that most observers don't talk about. We talk about, Israel's military problems in Gaza. We talk about Israel's political problems. They haven't defeated Hamas. Hamas still is surviving. Hamas is thriving politically. The world has rallied around the Palestinian cause. And the Palestinian cause today, the face of the Palestinian cause is Hamas. So even though the world won't say it, they're rallying around Hamas. Israel has lost politically. But, logistics is what wins war, and the economy is what's behind logistics. This is unsustainable for Israel. The damage being done to their economy right now is real. They're running out of money. They have unemployment issues. Who's going to pay for the displacement of nearly 100,000 people? People are starting to leave Israel. People who came to Israel saying this is the land of milk and honey are starting to realize that it ain't. And it's only going to get worse if they dare go into Lebanon and their Operation Litani 2.0 or whatever they want to do. And Hezbollah says, yeah, but we decided to call it Operation Galilee, because Hezbollah's not going to sit there and let Israel define where the battle is going to be fought. Hezbollah will define that, and they already have. The battle will be fought on Israeli soil. And now the Israeli economy taking an even bigger hit. It's unsustainable. This is what's going on. This is why it's important. And here's the big takeaway, because it's Europe's paying a price too as well. The European economy, already teetering on the brink of collapse, is absorbing tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of economic loss because of what's going on. If we were to expand the conflict into Iran, one thing the U.S. Navy has said religiously over the course of the past decade or so is that we guarantee that the Strait of Hormuz will be open. We guarantee it. We're the United States Navy. We guarantee that no matter what, Iran will not be able to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. You have our word. Really? I think what the Houthi have proven is that the U.S. Navy can't guarantee anything. And that if Iran decides to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, that's game, set, match. Because as much economic damage is being done by shutting down the Bab el-Mandeb, if they shut down the Strait of Hormuz, that will strangle the lifeblood of the global economy. That is the flow of oil out of the Middle East. Oil prices will go through the roof. The European economy will collapse. The American economy will take a huge hit. This is the big takeaway about what's going in the Red Sea, that the U.S. can't guarantee anything. It's not just this. How about those South China strategic sea lines of communication that we say are so essential to the world? We can't guarantee those too. If there were ever a global conflict, what the United States has shown is that all the transits, North Atlantic transit, South China transit, every transit will be shut down, denied to us. And we are, one of our strengths are we're this continent surrounded by two big oceans. And we've always said we are a seagoing power, baby. Our Navy guarantees the flow of commerce to our Navy can't guarantee squat. Our Navy can't guarantee squat. And if there is a global conflict, the American people better get ready for empty shelves. You can mock Russia all they want, but this past summer, Russia published a new foreign policy paper. And one of the key elements of Russian foreign policy is the notion of self-sufficiency, meaning that no matter what happens in the world, Russia will be able to take care of Russia with its own resources. America can't do that. We can't take care of anything with our own resources. Hell, we've sent all our heavy industry abroad. We have this artificial economy that's totally dependent upon infusions of goods and wealth from abroad, goods and wealth that are generated by and protected by the rules-based international order that the world is rejecting. The other thing that's happening this week is 5 new nations in BRICS: Saudi Arabia, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, right there in the head of the Middle East. You think they want to play America's game of injecting chaos and anarchy into the region? No, they're all about stability. And they're joining a forum that's about engendering stability. We're seeing a tipping point. America is not becoming just weaker. We're becoming irrelevant. We used to call ourselves what was that? The exceptional nation, and then with the indispensable nation. The world can't live without us. You got to have us. And Russia and BRICS and China are saying, no, you're irrelevant. We don't care about you anymore. We'd like to be friends with you. It'd be nice, but we don't need you. And increasingly, we don't want you. That's the reality.
What's happening on the battlefield right now in Ukraine? I imagine they are starting to experience a paucity of ammunition, to say the least. And I see, you know, Avdiivka and all of these other places starting to crumble bit by bit. And, you know, we've talked about it for long, you know, the way the Russians fight, exhausting your enemy, this slow train coming, you know, like what is it? An avalanche rolling downhill, snapping trees on the way down. Look, what's happening on the battlefield?
Well, back when this special military operation started, people asked me what I viewed the correlation of forces were. And I said, look, I think Ukraine has about 700,000 troops. And then Russia's trying to do a lot with 200,000 troops. And that normally, you remember this, Gar, we had this conversation. I said, normally you want a 3-to-1 correlation in your favor, and Russia's initiating offensive operations with a 1-to-3 disadvantage. And everybody went, no, Ukraine doesn't have that many troops. And I'm like, yes, they do. When you count the regular forces, the border guards, the territorial forces, they had around 700,000. And the reason why I bring this up is that, you know, Ukraine has, by estimates, lost between 400,000, 500,000 men, probably dead, and easily double that number in wounded. That's, let's call it 1.4 million casualties. Now, they've also gone through like 5 or 6 mobilizations. And so it was interesting that Zelensky gave a figure the other day. He said, we got about 880,000 men in uniform today. That's 180,000 more than what they started the war with. And most people are going, well, wait a minute. That's not a collapsed army. That's not a defeated army. Well, it's just a number, guys. The 700,000 that they had at the beginning of the special military operation were well-trained, well-equipped, well-led, operating, you know, with a combat cohesiveness. And what Russia has done is get involved in this meat grinder operation, grinding them down. And so this well-trained, well-led, well-equipped force got ground down. Then they mobilized, equipped them, trained them, ground down. They mobilized more, equipped. And the numbers have to expand because the war is, there's a very long frontage and it's become a fully staffed frontage. So you can't have gaps. So they need more numbers to maintain this combat cohesiveness. So, but even though their numbers are up, the quality of the troops is diminished severely. The quality of the equipment is diminished. They don't have sustainability. They don't have the ammunition. They don't have the fuel. The nature of the conflict has changed dramatically from what it was in 2022. The artillery war. You know, when this war started, that people still operating under gun lines or the lazy W. You know, bringing in your 6 to 8 howitzers on the field and boom, 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 boom. They don't do that anymore. Why? Because they all die. The counter battery now, you basically have your guns operating in singles or in pairs, and you're shooting and scooting. There's no more massed fires because drones and everything doesn't allow that to happen. The nature of war has changed. There's no massed armored assaults. I just watched a video of a Russian attack. You know, they used 4 tanks and about 6 infantry fighting vehicles for their objective. They accomplish this objective. On occasion, they don't. They come in with their 4 tanks and the 6 infantry fighting vehicles, and they advance. They hit a mine. Artillery comes in. They lose. It's war. You know, we lost entire battalions in April 1945, launching operations against the Germans who were defeated. It's war. It happens. But the point is, with this 880,000, the Ukrainians are losing 20 to 30,000 men a month. 20 to 30,000 men a month minimum. Probably going to be more than that as the correlation issues. The Russians, on the other hand, are gaining 20 to 30,000 men a month. The Russians are just getting stronger and stronger, and the Ukrainians are getting weaker and weaker. And what you're seeing is that as the Russians grind out, because 880,000 is the bare minimum physical presence Ukraine needs on the battlefield to maintain cohesion. In a month, it's going to be down to 850,000. And if they ain't replacing them, that means that you're spread even thinner now. The next month after that, oh my goodness, now you're down to 820,000, 810,000. Now you're down to 780,000. And next thing you know, you don't have troops. The numbers look impressive, but they're not impressive because you're weakening your presence while the Russians are getting stronger. And we see the Russians starting to break through here, break through there, break through here. Now, Russia's not going to be doing any mass big arrow stuff anytime soon. Why? Because that's not their game plan. Their game plan isn't to run into the Ukrainian meat grinder. Again, I bring up April 1945, when America had defeated the Germans. But when we got cocky, when we said, let's go, pedal to the metal, and we ran into Germany saying the Germans are defeated, there was that one German battalion that wasn't defeated. And it was in a prepared defensive position, and it knocked the living snot out of us, killing hundreds of Americans. So Russia doesn't want to give Ukraine that opportunity. They're not going to come running in, hey, diddle, diddle, straight up the middle, and bam, 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 have the remaining Javelins and the remaining Caesars and the remaining M777s come in and rain death and destruction down on them. What Russia's going to do is continue the game that they've been playing, which is to grind the Ukrainians down, to just grind them down, and then bit by bit, bite off a chunk of territory, forcing the Ukrainians to deploy reserves that they don't have, which means they're pulling them out of the line. We talked about this. This is what is happening. As the Russians advance, the Ukrainians have to take troops because there's nobody left. So they have to take troops out of another position and bring it here. And the Russians are going, oh, thanks. Let's attack here now, where they took the troops out. So they attack there, and the Ukrainians go, oh, damn. Bring these guys in. And it's like that Dutch boy in the dam, you know, when he's riding his bike down the dam, and he goes, oh, a leak. Oh, another leak. He runs out of fingers and toes really quick. And the leaks keep coming, the dams collapsing. That's the process we're in right now. That's the process. This is why there's a crisis in Ukraine. Because Zaluzhny, the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, is saying, we need an immediate infusion of 500,000 men, an immediate infusion, because by the time we absorb them and train them and equip them and get them ready to go to the front lines, we're going to be 500,000 short. So we need them right now. And Zelensky's going, well, how are we going to train them? How are we going to equip them? We don't have any equipment. So you're just going to put these bodies in the front lines. Zelensky's going, yeah. That's exactly what we're doing because we have no choice. We are facing the imminent collapse of the Ukrainian army as we speak. And if we don't do something dramatic, there's going to be major changes. And we now know what these major changes are going to look like. Putin has said it. Belgorod has been attacked. Belgorod's a Russian city and adjacent to Ukraine. It's been attacked on a regular basis. Voronezh has been attacked. Putin has said, we are going to create a buffer that guarantees that Russian soil will never be attacked whenever this conflict ends. So thank you, Ukraine. You just lost Kharkov. You just lost Kharkov. The Russians have made a strategic decision that you have lost Kharkov. And by sinking that Russian ship in Sevastopol, you just lost Odessa. Guaranteed, 100%. You've lost it. This war will not end until those territories are taken. And once you take Kharkov and it becomes a Russian city, the buffer zone extends beyond the Dnieper River into the Ukrainian heartland. And this is what the Russians are moving towards. There are at least 2 new combined army formations that are on the cusp of being deployed. In one, I believe, in the Zaporizhia area, the other one up in the Lugansk, Donetsk area. And there's more that are created, but I think you're going to see in the not too distant future major pushes where where the Russians are going to take advantage of this collapse of combat cohesion and begin taking the territory necessary. First, focused on taking total control of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, regaining control of all that territory. but also beginning the push towards Kharkov to threaten Kharkov. There's talk about them coming down through Sumy, and also to begin the drive on Odessa. And as I said, the Russians are getting stronger every day. The Ukrainians are getting weaker. There's rumors that tomorrow that Zelensky will sign the paperwork tomorrow. And the big question is, will the Ukrainian military back this, or will there be a revolt? Could we be looking at a coup d'etat, which would bring up another interesting test of America's morality? Because, those Africans had some coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and we condemn them because coups are bad. We only support real legitimate democracies. What happens if there's a coup in Ukraine? What are we going to do? It's a good coup? Hey, this is okay. Zelensky, you're our man. We don't care that Ukraine is no longer a democracy. We support the military junta. I mean, we're seeing Ukrainian collapse. They just got a little burst of adrenaline. I think the EU has approved 54 billion euro to be released for Ukraine. But that's like me running a marathon, and I'm on mile 12 and I've collapsed. I've used up all my energy. I got nothing left, and somebody comes up and gives me 2 lines of cocaine. I go, oh, I can run 3 more miles, and then boom, I got nothing. I collapse and die. This is a joke. The money that it's just encouraging more dead Ukrainians, more corruption, and this is the sad reality that there is a trajectory that the Ukrainian conflict has taken that's irreversible. It will only end with a strategic Russian victory. And the West knows this. You see the absolute panic in NATO right now. They're talking about the inevitability of a Russian victory. We have to prepare for this Russian victory. The British, who have been reducing their military, they have 76,000. I think in a year they're going to have 56,000. We have to prepare for conscription. And Boris Johnson, the former prime minister, is bravely saluted and called himself Lance Corporal Johnson, ready to send his pathetic, fat, 60-plus-year-old body to the front lines, except he knows he'll never go. But this is the status of Germany, of Europe, of NATO. Admiral Bauer, the head of the military committee of NATO. We need to get ready for war with Russia in 20 years. Why? If you're going to win the war in Ukraine, you certainly don't know. Oh, you're not going to win the war in Ukraine. You're going to lose the war in Ukraine. Russia's going to get a strategic victory. Poland's starting to wonder what the hell the signs are going to look like on the border, because they're going to have to change them from the Ukrainian language to the Russian language. This is the reality that the world's facing. So it doesn't matter what the U.S. Congress does in terms of, freeing up money and everything. You're putting money into a broken system. As I explained to my wife this morning, because she was very worried about the 50 plus billion euro coming in. She's like, God, does this mean this war will never end? I said, no, the war will end. Understand that Russia right now is operating on a system where their defense industry. Do you remember how people were criticizing Shoigu this time last year? He's worthless. He's an idiot. He's a moron. He's this and that. Shoigu's going, I don't care, because what I'm doing is building up Russian defense industry. That's my job. And today, the whole world acknowledges, damn, he did a good job. Russian defense industry is kicking in. It's producing stuff. Russia will never have artillery shortage. Russia has sufficient equipment, and they can expand as they need, and they're flexible, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful. Meanwhile, Europe's going, well, we failed. We were supposed to generate enough industrial capacity to produce artillery shells for Ukraine, and we didn't do it, didn't even come close to doing it, can't do it. And we can't produce tanks, and we can't produce airplanes. We can't produce anything. We've promised Ukraine artillery systems, but we said we're going to give you 54, but we can only produce 18, and those are going to other nations. Europe has failed. So even 50 billion euros doesn't change any of that reality. It's not like these are magic euros where you spend them now and things magically happen. All those bottlenecks, those economic bottlenecks. No, I've got some magic euros from this new infusion of money, and suddenly everything works. It doesn't work that way. Europe is dysfunctional. America is dysfunctional when it comes to Ukraine. Ukraine is collapsing, and Russia, meanwhile, is chugging ahead on all cylinders. The International Monetary Fund recently did a reassessment of global economies, and they said, we didn't expect this, but Russia's not just growing, but they're growing at a faster rate than we expected. No kidding. That's what happens when you have competent leadership. Meanwhile, Europe is collapsing at a rate greater than what we expected. Yeah, that's what happens when you have incompetent leadership. This is the reality that we're facing today.
I recall when there was a discussion about the Afghanistan debacle, trying to get out of Afghanistan, and it was an absolute disaster, which we needed to leave, but I would have thought you could do better than that, but okay. And then this Ukraine started, and a lot of people said, oh boy, this is going to be a far bigger debacle. Now you've got the Middle East. Oh, don't even need to bring that up, how bad that is. So then I read, the U.S. is sending 2 aircraft carrier groups to the Asia Pacific to deter China. Now we can't deter the Houthis in the Red Sea. They don't have an air force. They don't have a navy. They got a few missiles and drones. We can't deter them. They shoot every day. We bomb them, and then they yawn and shoot some more. And we're now going to, my understanding is the U.S. can build about 5 Navy ships a year, and China builds 200. So knowing that we're threatening them, I cannot even fathom the amount of missiles, the amount of ammunition, the amount of things that China has built defensively. And Russia and China both seem to be kind of looking at the Iran model, shall we say, of empowering its allies when it comes to North Korea. And I think when it comes to technology, when it comes to a lot of this stuff, I mean, the Russians, it's clear what's happening with North Korea with them. The Chinese just a week ago had a delegation in North Korea. It seems to me they're looking at it saying, if we get attacked, we got this front, this front, this front, North Korea, what have you, and they're setting things up in case they get attacked defensively. Your thoughts on the situation, God knows, with all the other disasters in the Pacific region?
It was interesting that China has appointed a new minister of defense. The last one got removed for, I believe, some allegations of corruption. Apparently China cleaned house, and they went through and they found all the guys that were enriching themselves in the defense ministry, and they've literally cleaned house. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people arrested. And when China arrests you for corruption, it's usually a short walk to a park and a bullet in the back of the head. They don't play games. So bad news for the corrupt people, good news for China, because now they have people who appear to be serious about the business of securing China. But he just had a meeting with Shoigu, I believe yesterday or the day before, where he stated straight up that China has looked at Russia and Ukraine, and we fully back Russia and all of its objectives in Ukraine. Now, this doesn't mean that China is unleashing the Chinese military to go fight in Ukraine and all this, but what it does mean is that China will cooperate with Russia economically to continue to ensure that the Russian economy doesn't become weaker because of this conflict, but becomes stronger, or at least continues to sustain itself. And it also means that China will cooperate with Russia from a military technology standpoint, because diplomacy isn't, one thing I learned about diplomacy, for it to work, there ain't no such thing as a one-way street sign. So right. if the Chinese, the Minister of Defense is up there saying, Russia, we're with you, buddy. We got your back on Ukraine. Your goals are our goals. We're with you. And Shoigu's going, and you know that we got your back in the Pacific. Your goals are our goals. We're with you 100%. He didn't have to say it. It's just assumed. It's happening as we speak. China didn't go to North Korea in a vacuum. They went to North Korea because Russia has made the decision. It's something I've been telling people in certain circles that I said, you do understand that North Korea has been liberated. Sanctions will never again affect North Korea. Well, North Korea is not a member of BRICS, and they're never going to join BRICS. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because Russia's a member of BRICS. China's a member of BRICS. And what flows through Russia and China because of BRICS will end up in North Korea. So North Korea is to quote the famous Joe Biden, ipso facto, a member of, he used that term a lot when he was chastising me in the Senate back in 98, ipso facto. But North Korea is a member of BRICS, and they're going to benefit from this and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The containment of North Korea is over. And the important thing about opening up with North Korea, it means that China and Russia have basically said, yeah, you got a nuclear arsenal. Good for you. We'd like you not to use it, but we understand why you have it and we support it. And why not? The United States is reintroducing nuclear weapons into the United Kingdom. We withdrew them at 2008 because we said, well, we don't need them anymore. Well, now we're putting them back in. Why? Apparently Russia's a threat. And what Russia did, Lavrov came out and made a very important statement. It's been ignored in the West. Maybe people are listening, but they aren't acknowledging it. But he said, the day when we view, nuclear weapons in the NATO context as American weapons and British weapons and French weapons is over. If all nuclear weapons are NATO weapons, and if you are a NATO nation and you are part of the nuclear infrastructure, understand that we will treat you accordingly. So he just told Great Britain, we're going to blow you off the face of the earth if there's ever a conflict, because you've turned yourself into a nuclear target. France, too. You're done, France. You're finished. Any notion that, well, France is above it all. We have our own independent nuclear force, but we are above it all. No. If there's a conflict, if the
four armies, where are they? Well, 8 to 9 out of every 10 guys that we train are dead or wounded now. That's again, I'm not making that up. The military commissar of Poltava gave a statement. He said, out of every 100 guys that have been mobilized in Poltava, 80 to 90 of them are either dead or wounded. That's 80 to 90% casualty rate. Remember earlier I said 50 to 69% make combat ineffective. 80 to 90 means you ain't around anymore. You got nothing. So they're just, if this went up to the U.S. Congress, in World War II, they had on the European theater, the 36th Division, I think, was a Texas National Guard division, and they were getting ready to launch an attack across a river, the Rapino River or something in Italy, and the bombers came in. They're supposed to hit the Nazis on the other side. They greased their bombs early, and they blew the little snot out of the 36th Division, killed a whole bunch of Texans. All the Texan congressmen were screaming for blood, as they should be, incompetence like that. Now imagine having an American general hauled before Congress and they said, what happened? Well, we got beat. Why? The Russians were better trained, better equipped than us. What do you mean? What do you mean better trained? How long does it normally take to train a soldier to do a combat breaching operation? Well, sir, by the time we do basic training, advanced training, about 2.5 years. And how long did you train the soldiers for this combat breaching operation? About 2.5 months. So you took soldiers, gave them 2.5 months training for a 2.5-year project, and you threw them into battle. Yes, sir, that's about it. But they were competent, right? I mean, at least they had good fundamental skills. Oh, no, sir, only 3 weeks of training. Well, how long does it take to train a Marine, a basic training? 13 weeks, sir. And Ukrainians, you gave them 3 weeks. Oh, yes, sir. And then you put them into equipment. Now, they were familiar with the Leopard tank, right? Oh, no, sir, they've never dealt with a Leopard tank before. How long does it take to train a Leopard tank operator? Well, sir, it takes about a year and a half to get a good Leopard crew up to speed. And how much time did you give the Ukrainians? Sir, we gave them 3 to 5 weeks. Do you see where I'm going with this, Danny? Mm-hmm. If this was an American explaining the deaths of American soldiers to U.S. Congress this way, they'd all be arrested, as they should be, criminally negligent. But now, because these are just Ukrainians, we don't care about you. This is the thing that everybody has to understand. What I just told you proves we don't care about Ukraine. We don't. If we did, we would never let this happen. We are simply using Ukraine as a vehicle to bring pain to Russia. That's it. We're willing, as Lindsey Graham said, to fight to the last Ukrainian. And that is sickening. You know, we talked about that 90-year-old Nazi and what he did during the war. You do understand that Americans are guilty of a crime that is larger than the crime that he and his Nazi colleagues committed. They killed, 100,000 Poles, 200,000 Russians, 40,000 Jews. We've killed 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers. We did it. not the Russians. Don't blame the Russians. We're the ones that led them to undertake the most complicated military operation imaginable, the breach of a heavily defended position. And we said, do this, and we didn't train them right. We didn't equip them right. We didn't prepare them. They were totally unprepared for this. And we said, go forward. And then we have the audacity halfway through it, after they've lost 71,000 guys. You heard people say, well, those Ukrainians are just casualty averse. What? You can say what you want about the Ukrainians, and I'm very critical of again, especially the leadership that has embraced Nazi ideology, etc. But the Ukrainian soldiers, even the ones with minimal training, big brass balls to do what they're doing. I challenge anybody in your audience right now, just if you get into a vehicle and drive to certain death. And if you make it, get out of the vehicle and keep advancing. These Ukrainians are courageous. And be the Russians. Imagine the Russian getting the snot pounded out by artillery, holding your position, not withdrawing, so that you can lay waste to the Ukrainians coming in. Both sides are staffed with some of the bravest soldiers imaginable. I think I told you the story, but I'll just tell it one more time, about the Battle of Bakhmut, where the Wagner troops surrounded about 20 Ukrainian soldiers in a basement. They said, surrender, brothers, surrender. We'll treat you well. We'll feed you. You'll go home, all that stuff. And what did the Ukrainians say? Russians don't surrender. And they fought to the death. They didn't say Ukrainians don't surrender. They said Russians don't surrender. Why? Because they're trained in the history and lore of the Soviet Union, of the Red Army, etc. And that's something that came out of World War I and World War II, where Russian soldiers were surrounded by the Germans and told to surrender. And they said, Russians don't surrender, and they fought to the death. This war is about Slavs fighting Slavs, brothers fighting brothers, cousins fighting cousins. This is the saddest kind of war imaginable. In America, we talk about the American Civil War. This is that kind of fight taking place right now. And the tragedy is, the Russians do generally, they genuinely care about the Ukrainians. You just see video after video of Russian soldiers going in, taking care of the wounded, evacuating. There's a new sick video out where the Russians actually came in and picked up the Ukrainians that were abandoned by their own side. They treat them, give them first aid, and they start to evacuate them. There's a Ukrainian drone overhead watching this. And as the Russians start to evacuate, the Ukrainian drone calls in Ukrainian artillery fire to kill the Russians who were rescuing wounded Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are, their leadership scum. The Russians actually treat the Ukrainians with respect. They capture them, they feed them, they give them first aid. There's a whole video of, and I know a lot of this is propaganda, but it's still sincere. They invite the families to come in and visit the prisoners of war. So the girlfriends, the wives, the mothers, all get to come and visit their sons, their husbands, their relatives in prison. I mean, this is tragic. The Russians care more about the Ukrainians than we do.
Yeah, and I think what's even more sick about this too is, as we were talking about earlier, that there's a script being written for Zelensky and for Ukraine's so-called leadership, and it almost feels like now, as we were talking about, the seasons, or this current season is just poorly written. It almost feels like at this very moment there really isn't much of a script left, and you have Zelensky kind of lashing out at the mouth, and it seems like there's a lot more tension here, and at the same time that there's this tension between basically his masters and himself, there's also this change in the narrative, which to me is even more heinous and underscores a lot of what you're saying here in terms of the difference between how the Ukraine's government, how NATO, how the United States are treating Ukrainians as compared to Russia. Now they're talking about a long war of attrition. This, mind you, for months and months and months, all of the people who have pay attention to this stuff with a non-neocon mentality have been talking about Russia fighting a war of attrition. Now the collective West is saying, oh no, this is a war of attrition and we need to fight this till the end. And you have Alexei Arestovich talking about 2035. I mean, will there be any Ukraine left if that's the case? This is the leadership This is basically all the leaders of this project now talking in this manner of, yeah, we'll just permanently do this to Ukraine. It'll just happen on and on and on and on, and we won't change our tune. We'll just continue to throw them out there until we can't any longer.
Look, the it takes two to tango. I mean, first of all, I always find it funny that the West talks about a frozen thing, a negotiated ceasefire, etc. But isn't it Zelensky that had his parliament pass a law that prohibits any talk of negotiation? And the Russians keep saying, you guys want us to negotiate, but I mean, you might want to talk to Zelensky to get the parliament to repeal the law that says he can't negotiate. But the Russians have made it clear, and again, they throw the words back of the West. Early on, Stoltenberg and others were saying that because the Russians don't want to negotiate, this is a war that will be decided on the battlefield. On the battlefield. Okay, well, and now they're going negotiating, and the Russians are going, no, I like that other thing you were saying. It's decided on the battlefield because that's where it's going to be decided. There will be no negotiation. First of all, who are they going to negotiate with? They tried it with the Ukrainians, the same ones that are there right now. They lied. Remember, Zelensky actually negotiated a treaty that was ready, a ceasefire agreement that could have brought an end to this war. The Germans and the French lied to the Russians about the Minsk Accords. There's a sham just to buy time to build up the Ukrainian army. Why are they going to believe them again? America's lied about everything we've ever done with Russia. Who are the Russians going to trust on this one? There's no one to trust. And if you can't trust, then you can't have negotiations. Plus, the Russians have made it clear that they have objectives that they're non-negotiable. And the Ukrainians have put forward just such unrealistic positions. I mean, the Russians have to withdraw to 1991 borders. Isn't going to happen. The Russians have to turn over their government to the International Criminal Court to be tried as war criminals. That ain't going to happen. The Russians have to pay reparations. That's not going to happen. It's stupid. It's if I could sit down and write demands to my town council and go to the town council meeting. I need you to dissolve the police department and give me all that money so I can build a golf course in my backyard. Well, that's not going to happen, Scott. Well, we're not going to have a settlement here until that happens. That's one of my conditions. Well, Scott, that's totally unrealistic. But nobody's telling Zelensky. Well, actually, everybody told Zelensky. Remember, there was that peace summit they had in Saudi Arabia where 30 nations came together, and Zelensky went, sent his guys down there, and they're like, here's our 10-point peace plan, total surrender by the Russians. And everybody else went, that ain't going to happen. You're so far off base. The Russians right now are in unconditional surrender mode. I mean, listen to Lavrov, listen to Putin, listen to everybody that speaks on this. There will be no negotiation. Ukraine will have to, agree to very specific things. But the sooner Ukraine agrees to it, the sooner this war can end, and the more territory Ukraine will have. Ukraine will never get Kherson back, never get Zaporizhia back, never get Lugansk back, never get Donetsk back. They will definitely never get Crimea back. But right now they can hold on to everything else. But if they continue this conflict and it goes on, if the Russians do push forward and start forcing the Ukrainians into this precipitous retreat, the Russians could very well end up having Kharkov, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, probably swing over, take Odessa, drive up to Transnistria, which means that entire Black Sea coast will be denied to the Ukrainians going forward. And once the Russians take it, at this juncture, I don't think they'd be giving it back. Again, not a Russian. They get to make their own minds. But, the Russians have made it clear that when Russian blood gets spilled on soil, it becomes Russian soil. And if the Ukrainians want to continue this fight and compel Russia to expend lives to take historically Russian cities like Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, Sumy, majority population, Russian populations, they're never going to give them back. Again, I hearken people to listen to Vladimir Putin's speeches, 2005 presentation, I believe, given in April. The one where he said that one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and everybody jumped in and went, see, that old Putin, he just wants to bring the Soviet Union back. But they didn't listen to the rest of the speech, where he said, because overnight tens of millions of Russians became homeless. I am the president of the Russian nation. The Russian nation isn't defined by the borders of the Russian Federation. It's defined by the location of the Russian people, people who have common culture, heritage, religion, language. And the people of Eastern Ukraine are, in the minds of Putin, part of the Russian nation. That doesn't mean that he wants to take them. Remember, in March, Russia was willing to give back these territories to Ukraine, but he just wants that the Ukrainian government treats the Russian population with respect, allows them to speak their language, worship the way they want to, etc. The Ukrainians are the one who committed, basically ethnic and cultural genocide against the Russians. So the Russians aren't going to yield on any of this. And once they take Russian territory, territory that's populated by a majority Russian population, I don't see a situation where they give it back. Not at this stage of the game.
Time in Israel has been quite brutal in my lifetime in many different occasions. Has the public relations been so poor for Israel? I mean, even in these past incursions into Gaza, past bombing campaigns, even when there were massive numbers of Palestinians being killed, there was this justification, whether it was Hamas, terrorism, or whether it was just the spirit of Zionism, that really held and stuck, especially in the West. And it was easy to kind of put Palestinians aside. It seems like the energy against Israel is stronger. And I think that's both cumulative over the years. More and more people, especially American Jews, getting kind of fed up with the war crimes. But also, I think it has to do with right now, how Israel is being portrayed, and also how the United States is kind of not helping the situation. I wanted to play a video of your favorite politician, a little small clip, Lindsey Graham. I hope I don't send you to the hospital, because I know you you despise Lindsey Graham. But I think he's kind of emblematic of what we are seeing in terms of the doubling down. And so I'm going to play a small clip for you to react to, because I think this is a huge problem for the United States and for Israel, in terms of just how it's coming off in the world, and how I believe, and I want your reaction to this, how it is also contributing to the already existing weaknesses that you've pointed out to for Israel. But here we go.
Is there a threshold for you, and do you think there should be one for the United States government, at which the U.S. would say, let's hold off for a second in terms of civilian casualties? Is there a point at which you would start to question?
If somebody asked us after World War II, is there a limit what you would do to make sure that Japan and Germany don't conquer the world? Is there any limit what Israel should do to the people who are trying to slaughter the Jews? The answer is no. There is no limit. But here's what you need to do: be smart. Let's try to limit civilian casualties the best we can. Let's put humanitarian aid in areas that protect the innocent. I'm all for that. But this idea that Israel has to apologize for attacking Hamas, who's embedded with their own population, needs to stop. The goal is to destroy Hamas. Hamas is creating these casualties, not Israel.
I don't think anyone's
civilian casualties.
So, your reaction, Scott?
Well, I just want to point out that Lindsey Graham is a lawyer, and he's a U.S. Air Force lawyer, which means that he has been versed in the laws of war. He knows, for instance, the principle of distinction. He knows what distinction is, and you can't drop a bomb. You can't put a round down range unless you've made a distinction between civilian and military. Now, yeah, if there's commingling, you've got issues. And then the concept of proportionality comes in. What's proportional? For instance, to take out one Hamas leader who wasn't, he was a regional, battalion commander, the guy that was supposedly at this refugee camp. there's no way America would ever allow the issue of proportionality to come in and say, we're going to put a bomb on target there that's going to kill 400 people to get one battalion commander. That's disproportional use of force, and that would be rejected. Any American who did that would be prosecuted for violating the laws of war. Lindsey knows this. He's